Just wanted to ask just a few questions about about how publications, books in particular, are classified in Australia, because I've got a few concerns about books that are showing up in public libraries. It's my understanding that under the Classification Act, a truncated version of that title, publishers of books don't need to seek classification for them unless they meet the definition under the Act of a submittable publication. That's broadly...
That's correct, yes.
Because it is a bit complicated. And the owner, therefore, is on the publisher to seek classification for the material if they think it's potentially fitting into that submittable publication category.
Or if otherwise they would just like to have the publication
or if they'd just like to have the clarification. And so that would, by definition, include publications that appear in public libraries. So there is the scope, I think, for unclassified material to hit public libraries. So I'm interested, what happens if a publisher doesn't seek classification for material which arguably, objectively, might fit that submittable publication categorisation?
Thank you. The classification scheme is enforced by state and territory governments, and so if there is material that would be considered or likely to be considered a submittable publication, it is up to state and territory enforcement agencies to put in an application to give the publication to the classification board. Yeah.
And so the onus is then on a local authority or a minister or a public official of that nature. So they've got to actually hear about it, find it, and then put it through.
Or I do, under the Classification Act, I do have the power to call in a publication.
Yes, or yourself, of course. The reason I say that is because I'm getting an increasing number of concerns and complaints about books that are showing up in public libraries. This is one. The index contains chapters on sexting, on kinks, fantasy and porn. I won't actually hold any of this up because it's pretty graphic in many senses, and it's rated, I think, for 14-year-olds and thereabouts. That may be an American classification, I don't know, or wherever the book's from. But there are sections here telling kids basically how to go about sexting. Before you start sending your naughty masterpieces around the world, take some time to get friendly with photo editing software or apps. Digital photos are permanent and are impossible to retract once they're out there. And there's, this is just sort of a broad splash of it. It's currently unclassified, as I understand it. It has that target audience of 14+ and is available in libraries in South Australia. My view is that would meet the category of submittable publication, particularly unsuitable for minors. So with that in mind, are you aware of any applications that have been made to classify that book or...
I'm not, I haven't...
No.
No.
No, that's okay. I guess, having heard that, would there be any scope for that to be done, or is there a process for that?
There's a process for that, yes. So if, in my opinion, I think that a publication is likely to meet the definition of being a submittable publication, I can ask the department to assist me in calling in that publication. Yeah. But I would only do that if it met the conditions or the definition of a submittable publication. Right. Yep. And the threshold for that is, in the context of publications, is whether the publication is likely to be classified RC, refused classification, which is a very high standard or low standard, depending on your point of view, to meet, or whether it's likely to cause offence to a reasonable adult to the extent that the publication should not be sold or displayed as an unrestricted publication, or if it's unsuitable for a minor to see or read. Yeah. Now, a minor is a person under 18, and of course we also have to look at the context of submittable publication under the criteria that are set out of the code, and the first one of which is that adults should be free to read, hear and see what they want, balancing that also with the requirement that minors should be protected from material likely to harm or disturb them. Yeah. So
it strikes me, and this is really not, I suppose, you're stuck with the legislative framework you've got, but it does strike me that there's a serious gap in the powers then afforded whereby this can just slip through, and others, this is just one of the sort of what I would say is inappropriate material that's going through public libraries on public display around the country and around my state. But there are surely gaps in your legislative powers then if the process in order to find this is for someone to find it, potentially take it out of their child's bedroom if they borrowed this book from a library, have it referred. I understand that process is onerous. There may even be a cost associated with it as well. Have it referred to a power. Would you say that there is need for reform of this area if that's the only mechanism? And these things are showing up in libraries, and it's almost like you have to let a crime happen before it gets stopped. It's a bad example, but
I won't comment on that book, or I won't make any personal comment on what I think about the content that you've described. It is interesting to note, though, that the publications guidelines haven't been reviewed since I think it's 2005, and they were developed in the context where really the largest bit of the board's workload for publications was classifying adult content. Yeah. And so they really are on the focus of what is okay and giving information about protecting minors from explicit adult sexual content. Yeah. And
could it be that perhaps this is more prevalent now, this sort of material, these sort of how-to guides coming out of the US, and therefore this is a new material problem, I say. Others might disagree, but which perhaps the legislative framework hasn't yet catered for. I mean, it feels to me as though if that is the process, and these books are just going out in the public libraries, we need to perhaps have a bit more of a look at the powers that are afforded.
It's possible that the guidelines were created in a different context,
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's all from me.